David woke up feeling groggy and exhausted overall. He found himself lying on a bed in a room that he did not recognize. He couldn't even remember how he even got there. The last thing he remembered was getting into a taxi to return to the hotel room he was currently staying at. He was away on a vacation from work to take his mind off some things. It had been a while since he had taken a vacation, so he felt that he had earned one for sure. The rest of his memory was still kind of fuzzy to him. He sat up in the bed to look at himself and noticed that he was wearing a white hospital gown. He didn't remember taking his clothes off, nor did he see them anywhere in the room. After a brief check to see if everything on his body was where it should be, he felt able to stand up, so he managed to get onto his feet. When he looked around the room, he originally thought it must be a hospital room because of the gown he was wearing, but the room he was in didn't resemble a hospital room at all. There wasn't any medical equipment, nor was there anything on the walls. The furnishings in the room included a small bed that he woke up on, a toilet, small sink, a table and chair, and what appeared to be a door. He walked over to the door, but didn't see any hinges, a lock, or even a handle. This caused some concern because now it started to feel kind of like a prison, especially since now he didn't see any windows in the room. He thought about any kind of reason why he would be in prison, or if anyone he knew had it out for him, but nothing came to mind. Walking away from the door, he looked at the toilet and sink. The toilet appeared to be normal, although it was attached to the wall. The sink was attached to the wall too, and the faucet was a single nozzle with a time release button. There was a towel there, but it was also attached to the wall by a hook. He then moved over to the solitary table and chair. As with the rest of his furnishings, the table was attached to the corner wall it was on, and the chair was more like a stool that was fixed to the floor next to the table. Along the side of the table was what looked like an outline of a rectangular slot in the wall. If the slot opened, things could be passed through, but it was way too small for him to fit through. It may be useful for something in the future though. Sitting opposite of the chair, he noticed a monitor that was set behind some type of glass. The monitor was showing random scenes from nature while playing some easy listening music through a speaker mounted near it. He couldn't place the songs that it was playing, but it reminded him of elevator music. The music never really seemed to stop, it just faded into the next song without much of a transition. Looking back at the monitor, the scenery it was showing varied from forests, oceans, mountains, and deserts. Neither the scenes, nor the music, seemed to have any kind of repeating pattern about them. He looked up at the ceiling and noticed a light fixed into it behind another piece of glass. The light seemed steady, so he assumed it was a type of LED light. He then noticed in one corner what appeared to be a camera looking into the room. It too was set back behind glass. Someone was obviously watching him in the room, but who could it be? Lastly, he went back to the bed to see what he had to deal with there. There was a single pillow on it along with a bed sheet. Looking under the bed, he saw that it was attached to the wall as well as everything else in the room. Apparently, the person who put him in there didn't want him to rearrange anything. He decided to play it safe for now and not cause any scene until he needed to react to whatever was going on. Sitting back on the bed, he noticed that there wasn't any clock in the room. He had no idea what time it was, nor even what day it was for that matter. How long had he been in this room before he woke up? These were just a few of the myriad of questions running through his mind now. He tried to keep some track of the passage of time by trying to time out the music songs, but they varied in their length, and with nothing to write the numbers down, he saw the futility in it. He would look at the monitor at times to see the scenery changing. He noticed though that when he stared at the monitor for a while, he seemed to space out some. He would be looking at something on the monitor, only to be startled awake the next moment. If only he had a way to keep track of if he was spacing out or not. After a while of sitting there running through different scenarios in his head, he found himself starting to get hungry. Almost as if on cue with his stomach, the panel at the table slid up and a tray of food came through. Before he could get to the table, the panel had closed itself. He looked down at the tray the food had slidden on. There was a piece of baked chicken on it, some cooked potato cubes, lentils, a slice of cantaloupe, and some toast. There was also a bottle of water on it wrapped in a napkin. He stared at the food for a while looking to see if there was anything wrong with it. It looked okay, and smelled amazing, so he took a test bite of each item and waited to see if it was poisoned. After waiting for a little while to further make sure there was nothing wrong with the food, he finally decided that it was safe to eat, and then ate everything on the plate. While he was eating, he also managed to convince himself that it wouldn't be beneficial to have him dead for whomever had captured him. After he had finished eating, he walked over to the bed and sat down with his back to the wall for support. He sat like that for a long while and listened to the constant music. He also found himself strangely drawn to the monitor from time to time, yet each time he lost track of things after spacing out from each viewing. It was during one of these times when he felt a familiar pull of nature come to him. He walked to the toilet and stood up to pee like he had done so many times before in his life. After washing his hands and drying them on the towel, he walked back to the bed again. He sat there for minutes, or maybe even hours for all he knew, when the music started slowing down to more of a basic white noise. He also noticed the monitor dimming down, along with the lights in the room. Not sure what was getting ready to happen, he jumped to his feet to prepare for it. Nothing happened while waiting in the complete darkness of the room, so he assumed that it meant that it was time for sleep. As he laid down on the bed, he rested his head on the pillow to continue thinking about the events that led up to this moment he found himself in. The next thing he knew, it was bright in the room again. He didn't feel tired, so he assumed he had managed to get some sleep, but how long he slept was a good guess on his part. Looking around the room, he noticed that the tray that the food had come on before was gone, and in its place was what could be described as breakfast. There was a container of milk, some scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and half of a grapefruit. He walked over to the table and began to eat what was there. He didn't bother checking for poison this time because he was okay from the last meal. After finishing breakfast, he looked around the room again to see if anything had changed. Not seeing anything new, he looked at the monitor some to see the pretty scenery. As with his earlier glances at the monitor, he lost track of things again. After coming out of his monitor-induced trance, he went over to the bed and laid down for some rest. As with his sleep the night before, his nap happened almost immediately. When he woke up this time, he noticed that the breakfast tray was gone. With nothing new to do at the time, he went through and searched the room again. This new search turned up more results, but he found that the images on the monitor were neat-looking and seemed to be calling to him. He decided to stare at it again to pass the time by. This time, when he came out of his trance, he noticed that there was another plate of food in front of him. He must have been out of it to not notice the panel slide up and the food come through. Since he was already sitting there, he figured he might as well eat. This time there was some baked fish with vegetables covered with some spice flakes of some sort, a salad, and the usual bottle of water wrapped in a napkin. As with his previous meals, this one tasted wonderful. He found it odd that someone would go through the trouble of kidnapping him, yet decide to feed him good food like what he had been given. After he finished eating, he used the bathroom and laid back down on the bed again. After sitting there for a bit, the lights started to go down once more, along with the monitor display. Being present in the darkness of the room, he figured he may as well go back to sleep and finish this day. This became his routine over the coming days, weeks, months, or whatever the frame of time he now existed in. The only constants in the room that he had was the monitor and its music, the food, and not much else. He still tried to catalog things with a schedule, but with no way to keep track of time, there was equally no way to log a schedule down. He did notice that his captors seemed to be able to predict when he was hungry, because each time he started to feel hunger pains, his tray of food appeared. In some cases, he was closer to the panel to look for hands or something, yet he didn't see them. He reasoned that the system must be automated somehow. He just knew that he was being very well taken care of. He thought that it was weird for him to be so calm despite such a tragic thing as being kidnapped with no real explanation. He just seemed to be calm overall through this ordeal. During one of the times that he was awake, he looked under his gown and noticed that his body hair wasn't looking as prominent as he remembered it being. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't shaved since he had been placed in this room. He remembered having his facial hair grow back shortly after shaving it in the morning, yet during the moments that he was awake, he didn't feel the stubble as much as usual. He couldn't think of why his facial hair wouldn't grow like it used to, but he found himself with a strange feeling of satisfaction in knowing that his facial hair wasn't like it used to be. He knew that he was alive for now, and was thankful that he was being taken care of so nicely. He hadn't bathed since he had been there, yet he didn't smell bad at all. Also, the hospital gown seemed to always have a nice fragrance around it. Somehow, he was being shaved and cleaned each night and had his gown laundered. He just wished he could thank them for the tender care. He knew that he had been there for a while because he noticed that the hair on his head was getting longer. He found himself absently twirling it around with his finger from time to time in order to pass the time. After a while of settling into his routine, he woke up one morning and noticed that his hospital gown had changed color into more of a light shade of pink color. There was also a pleasant smell coming from it too, almost like a perfume. He felt excited to have something new added to his normally bland color surroundings. A small part of him wondered why the color change would be to pink. He didn't recall it being a color he was usually attracted to, but for some reason, it seemed nice to have. He still saw the hair on his body thinning more and more, but it made the gown he was wearing feel better against his skin. He found it better to not have so much ugly hair covering his body. With the hair on his head getting longer, it was a joy there too as he had something to play around with. As more time progressed on, he would sometimes wake up to a different colored gown. Sometimes it was pink, purple, light shades of blue, or many other colors that are available. He did begin noticing that the gowns started rubbing on his chest differently. It sometimes bothered him the way it would rub against his nipples. In a way to counter that rubbing, he absently began to massage the area to take his mind off the situation he was in. He just knew that it felt way better rubbing on his nipples and areolas than it ever did playing with his hair. The room he was in was never cold nor hot and seemed to be at a great temperature setting, yet he found that his nipples were erect a lot more than usual. Another morning he woke up to a different feeling. It seemed that his normal hospital gown was made from a different material than his previous ones. This one was a lot softer and had an almost silky feeling to it. The color for it this time was a gorgeous, deep shade of pink. The feeling of this new gown rubbing on his nearly hairless body, combined with its constant assault on his sensitive nipples, was a fantastic feeling for him to have. As he was massaging his nipples one day, he thought about the erotic sensations that the rubbing was having on him. Despite the erotic sensations, his penis didn't rise to the occasion as it normally would. He looked at it and saw that it seemed smaller in stature than normal as well. Cupping his testicles in his hand, he noticed that they too seemed smaller in size. A small part of his mind was screaming that something was off, but he let that thought pass, went back to rubbing on his nipples instead. After eating another delicious meal at the table, and going through another trance in front of the monitor, it dawned on him that there was a weird lump behind his nipples. There was a bit of minor discomfort as well, but it wasn't overly painful. This should have caused concern, but he instead found himself rolling the lump around somewhat in the areas it wasn't as uncomfortable. As the days progressed on, he kept trying to keep track of changes going on around him. While the room was always the same, sometimes a revelation would occur to him. One such revelation came after he had finished peeing. He almost always stood to pee before waking up in the room, but he couldn't remember the last time he did while he was in the room. He found himself always sitting to pee, and wiping off after he was done. Where did that habit come from? He just found it to be easier to sit and pee, and it was a lot cleaner to wipe afterward, rather than the customary jiggle when complete. It was probably for the best too, as he had been naked under the gown the whole time he had been in the room. He didn't want unsightly pee stains on the front of his lovely gowns. It did get drafty sometimes under the gown, but at least the room temperature was steady. Another change he noticed while looking over his body was that he was losing weight. The healthier food was having a wonderful reaction with his weight. Looking over his whole body, he saw that he was slimming up all around. His legs looked better, his stomach area was flattening out, even the mass on his arms was diminishing nicely too. On his examination of his body, he did notice that his butt didn't seem to be slimming down, nor his hip area. He also saw that the area around his nipples seemed kind of puffy too. This kind of made him happier though, because he really enjoyed playing with his nipples, and now he had more material to play with, so to speak. He was almost able to cup his whole hand around them. With this added flesh, he not only rubbed on his nipples, but would massage the surrounding area as well. He sometimes wished that he had a mirror in the room, but the only thing he had with any reflection on it was the glass in front of the monitor, but it didn't reflect nearly enough to see anything substantial. Fortunately, the overall changes he was experiencing weren't causing him much pain, unless he accidentally bumped his chest against something. The changes were just causing him a deep-down feeling of pleasure overall. It was almost becoming easier to pass the time in the room as more days passed. He knew that whenever he was feeling bored, looking at the monitor for a bit would pass the time simply fine. He even found himself enjoying the continuous music playing through the speakers. The swelling of tissue behind his nipples kept growing until one day when he woke up, there was an undeniable truth that he had breasts now. They weren't huge by any means, but there was something that started blocking his view of his feet in the morning. He also found more and more flesh to massage around behind his nipples. As with being held captive for no reason, he didn't feel concerned about growing breasts. When he really thought about it, the arrival of breasts felt like it completed him somehow. A thought like that was something he never considered, as he originally felt that he was fine with having a flat chest. He guessed that somewhere in the back of his mind, having breasts was something he had desired for longer than he knew. After standing up from his bed, he removed his gown and really took another survey of his body. The last time he saw a body that looked like his, it was on his last girlfriend. He had nice and shapely legs which ran all the way up to his widened hips and butt. There was almost no body hair on him anymore except a bit of a fine fuzz overall. When he got to his penis and testicles, he found that his testicles were less than half the size than what he remembered. His penis too had reduced to what he had before he hit puberty. Oh well, though, he thought, it's not as if I'm using them right now in this room anyway. As he continued up, he went past his super flat stomach with only the slightest pudge near his waist. Leading beyond his stomach led him once again to his feminine breasts. He hadn't had the gown off much during his stay, but the changes to his breasts were amazing. His nipples were almost twice the diameter from when he got there, and his areolas had nearly doubled in size too. Again, when he thought about these changes, he wondered why he wasn't as shocked as he felt he should be. That still same calmness that he had experienced since his arrival seemed to prevail completely. The hair on his head had continued to grow until it reached down past his shoulders, and a decent way down his back. With the occasional playing around with, and the obvious care that his captors gave him when he was asleep, his hair flowed beautifully with a nice bounce and fullness to it. He had noticed a unique scent to his hair once it got long enough to put in front of his face to sniff. As with the scent to his hospital gowns, the apparent shampoo in his hair was a delightful scent too. The days that came around after his last body check found him with his breasts growing further and further outward from his chest. He never really had much to do with his past girlfriend's underwear, so he wasn't even sure how to begin to describe how big his chest had become, or what the cup size may be. He just knew that they had to be almost as big as theirs were. Each time he tried to dwell on the fact that he appeared to be becoming a woman, the joy from it seemed to outweigh what should have been great concern about it. He had a passing thought that if he was a man, he should be greatly concerned about his turn of events. If he was a man? Where did that thought come from? More time passed until one day a new surprise happened to him. The hospital gowns that he had been wearing had all been open in the back. This time, however, the gown was closed behind him now. It was a solid gown with a purple pattern around it. This came as a welcomed change too, because with having his back exposed to the room all the time was kind of annoying to him. With the back sealed off, it made it easier to move around the room now, plus it kept any slight chill off his body better. There was still the occasional draft coming up from below though, but at least he had some more coverage than before. This new gown didn't have sleeves on it either, which gave him a better range of motion with his arms. With the sleeves missing, he really noticed his arms better. The slight fuzz that he saw around most of his body was also on his arms too. He had also lost a great deal of his original muscle mass too. Not that he was overly muscular, but he did have some muscle there to lift the occasional heavy object around. With his breasts settling down on their outward growth, he began to feel them pulling on his chest more. He started to think about ways to negate that pulling sensation, but the room he was in left little choices for support. As with his feeding schedule, and the factors that food always showed up when he felt hungry, a new option became available the next day. When he woke up and looked over at breakfast, there was something new sitting there at the table, a bra. The bra was a beautiful-looking lacy-style pink-colored bra. The hunger that he had for food was outweighed at the sight of the bra. He quickly pulled his gown off and set about trying to figure out how to get this newest treasure on. He remembered watching his last girlfriend getting dressed in the morning and how she put her bra on. It took a bit of coordination, but he was finally able to at least get his hands behind his back to get the clasps hooked up. He then set about adjusting his breasts into the cups themselves. The support that the bra offered was more than welcome. When he put his gown back on, he noticed that it seemed to fit him better now. It no longer rubbed against his nipples, and with the way his breasts were compressed inside the bra, the gown didn't have to stretch as much to go around them. He thought to check on the tag to at least see what his size was, but for some reason there was no tag on it. But at least he finally had some support for his breasts. With the changing of his beautiful gowns over time, he noticed that his bras were changing as well. There were different styles, patterns, materials, and coverage options with each new bra that showed up. He had no idea the myriad of options available to women with just one garment. With more passing days, his mind started to wander toward additional clothing, especially for his lower half. While he was almost getting used to the random drafts, it was still kind of annoying when they happened. As with other things that had happened in his room, the magical slot that provided him with food, and his bra, came through again. He saw that there was another item sitting there with his food. When he got to the table and looked, he saw a pair of panties waiting for him next to a matching bra. They were a pair of pink, nylon-looking ones with the leg holes cut higher and a decorative waistband. He thought his girlfriend called them a high-cut pair. By this time, he had been wearing a bra all the time, so a pair of panties didn't even register with him that they were designed more for women to use. He pulled the gown off and fixed his bra on now with greater ease than when he had first started. As he slid the panties up his hairless legs, the feeling was exquisite. As he got them all the way up and they settled over his groin, he noticed that they fit around his butt wonderfully. In fact, they fit way better than any of his original underwear ever did. With the reduced size of his penis and testicles, the crotch area was almost flat in front of him too. He noticed that the panties matched the bra in several ways, which brought a smile to his face. He finally had something to combat the drafts all around. The gown with the closed back helped with that, the bra kept his breasts supported, and now the panties kept his groin safer. With his gown back on, he sat down to eat breakfast. It was as he was sitting down that he noticed something else that he had been doing without ever knowing why, or when, he started. Sometime after he had been wearing the closed-back gowns, he had begun smoothing it under his butt as he sat down, just like he remembered seeing women do. It just made sense to him to be doing it, but with the addition of the panties, he noticed then that he was smoothing his gown then. Days continued to pass from then with different styles and colors to the clothing as he woke up. One morning he woke up to see something completely different in his room. A closet of sorts was standing in one corner. He didn't even stop to eat breakfast this time and went over to the closet. It was a light-colored one with a wood grain pattern on it. The closet had two large doors on the front of it that opened inside to a coat rack with many other gowns in it. They looked a lot like the ones he had been wearing over the last several weeks, but this time he had access to them all at once. Looking down from where the gowns were hanging, he saw some small drawers at the bottom of the closet. When he opened the top one, he saw an assortment of the panties that he had been wearing. It was almost as if he were being rewarded with being able to make his own decisions now. He mentally thanked his captors for their trust in him. In another drawer he found his bras. A real surprise came for him when he investigated yet another drawer. There were pantyhose and stockings in there. He then looked back up at the rack and saw something shiny looking at him. It was a full-length slip. He remembered seeing his last girlfriend put one on to help cover up under a dress that she had that was kind of sheer with its material. After looking through the closet further, he was satisfied that he had seen everything there was in there and sat down to finally eat his breakfast. Once he was finished with breakfast, he found himself looking at the closet again. He had left the doors open so that he could look at his latest treasures every now and then. As he was staring proudly at them, he thought that they weren't exactly gowns as he had been telling himself, but they were dresses. Dresses for women. But he wasn't a woman, was he? Why would he be wearing a dress? As he was pondering this, he thought about it further. Women typically wear dresses, but women also typically wore bras and panties. He had been wearing a bra and panties for a while now in the room. He felt perfectly comfortable wearing them. He thought about his past girlfriend and her bra wearing. She wore bras to support her breasts. He too had breasts, which is why he was wearing a bra now. Not only was he wearing a bra, but he also had panties to match that bra. Now he knew that women don't always wear coordinating underwear, but he had been for a while now in the room. If he was not a woman, then why did he need to be wearing these items? He looked inside his panties and had to feel around to find his diminished penis and testicles, but he did eventually find them. This was all he really seemed to have to remind himself that he was still a man. Was he still a man? His head started to hurt trying to fight and reason with himself over something that seemed so right earlier. To help take his mind off the conflict that was going on at that moment, he decided to stare at the monitor for a bit. As with previous attempts, he spaced out into a much-needed trance while staring at it. When he came to, the conflict wasn't as pronounced as before, and his mind seemed to be better at peace with things. He wasn't quite sure why, but he always felt better after watching the images on the monitor. With things feeling better, he walked over to the closet again with more eagerness than he thought he would have toward clothing. He saw numerous styles and colors for the dresses. He even tried on many of them to not only pass the time, but to see how they fit with his new curves in all the right places. He even noticed some nightgowns and other sleepwear that looked better to sleep in other than the hospital gowns or dresses that he had been wearing up to this point. His main regret was not that he didn't feel like much of a man anymore, but that he didn't have a mirror to look at himself better. There was once more a minor internal conflict with his reasoning about this, but it quickly passed this time. As more and more time passed, the male part of him became a distant memory. As the time progressed further in the room, he began working with different variations of the dresses and coordinating bras and panties. It became a neat challenge for him to find what worked better than others. One morning he woke and found another neat item waiting for him in his closet: shoes. There was a small selection of pumps in there with varying heights of heels to try out. Not surprisingly, his captors had managed to get his correct shoe size. He began to wonder if he would ever meet them so he could thank them for treating him so nicely over all this time. He picked out a pair of pumps with the shortest heel length and tried them on. It was a bit awkward walking around his room with them at first. After many times of trying with them, he finally managed to get a decent walking pattern with them. He then decided to graduate to a longer heel length from there. He continued working with them until he was walking around confidently with the longest heel length that he had. He wasn't quite sure which one he preferred, but he could feel different benefits to them versus the dress that he had on at the time. After the arrival of the shoes that day, he almost found himself with an eagerness to wake up each day to see if there would be anything else waiting for him. The next day was a day that brought him all kinds of emotions at once. He opened his closet door and saw a rectangular box waiting for him. When he opened it up, he was at first startled to see someone looking back at him that he didn't know. It had been so long not having a mirror to look at that he wasn't sure if it was a video of someone else or something else altogether. He did finally realize that who he was looking at was in fact himself as he was now. He spent a lot of time looking at himself in the mirror doing different facial expressions to come to grips with things now. He at first thought that it was a beautiful woman staring back at him. The woman staring back at him was beautiful to him, he just didn't believe that it was him. He was slightly angry, but not because of what he looked like now, but more about the fact that he wasn't able to see the transformation until that time. He stared at the mirror for a long time before looking around in the box that it was in. He then noticed that it contained a lot of makeup and other cosmetics in it. This was going to be fun as he had never known anything about makeup other than watching his last girlfriend mess around with hers. Not sure how to proceed with the makeup, he took the box over to his table and sat down to eat. Shortly after he was done eating, he looked over at the monitor and saw something different for the first time since his arrival. The screen was showing tutorials of women putting on their makeup. He was glad to have brought the box over with him because he started to follow along with the tutorials. He spent most of this day following along with the tutorials. There was certainly a lot to learn and remember, with it and how complex it could be. He found himself with a better appreciation of what his last girlfriend had gone through with getting ready. It wasn't as simple as he thought it was. Fortunately, the box also had a pack of wipes to clear his makeup efforts each time he wanted to start over again. As he finally started growing tired of playing around with the makeup, he ate another meal which had been delivered while he was trying things out. He had long ago given up trying to reason with the food delivery system as he never once saw anyone passing the food through. After eating, he cleaned his face off and went over to the closet. He carefully took his dress off and pulled out one of the nightgowns that he had. It was a light blue nylon gown with delicate lace edging around the openings. He removed his bra and slid the nightgown over his head. The moment that the cool nylon material touched his breasts, his nipples stood out completely. A brief wave of euphoria washed over him, and he began massaging them like he used to back when they were growing. He hadn't massaged them for a while now since they seemed to stop growing, but the familiar sensations had returned this day. While he was still playing with them, the lights started going down in the room, so he made his way to bed for the night. After getting up the next day, and for however many days from there as he still didn't have a way to know the passage of time, he continued to work with his makeup skills, walking in his heels, and other things to keep himself occupied. He wasn't quite sure how, but like with his food showing up whenever he got hungry, but each time he felt the need to practice his makeup skills, the monitor would switch from its scenery images to the makeup tutorials again. He began to have fun with his makeup attempts and learning different techniques that he could use for different results. The makeup kit even had a brush in it for his long hair so that he could brush it some during the day. Every night while he was asleep, his captors had apparently taken care of his hair for him because he never had any real problems with it. It was calming for him though to brush his out during the day. After starting with the dresses, he would wake up naked in the morning so that he would be able to decide what he was going to wear that day. He enjoyed the decision-making abilities he now had with deciding his wardrobe. Even though the mirror wasn't too large, he still used it to get a better look at his body overall to see the changes. His healthier diet of food had given him a shapely figure overall. He lost a lot of muscle mass which made his arms and legs look thinner, but it allowed his dresses to flow freer around him which made him smile more. He had a flat stomach that led to his wide hips and butt. Most all the hair on his body was all but gone, except some around his groin area, the top of his head, and not anywhere else. He removed his bra so that he could get a better look at his breasts. The last time he had seen breasts like that was on his last girlfriend. His nipples appeared to be huge on him, and his areolas had increased a lot too. Putting his bra back on, he then removed his panties to look. With his pubic hair there, he had to push it aside to find where his penis and testicles were at. His testicles had almost disappeared completely, and he couldn't remember them ever being so small. The same went for his penis as it was barely a nub sticking out from his groin. He didn't seem to feel the loss that he thought he would have at such a change, but since he really hadn't needed it while in the room, he didn't feel a concern at its loss. He then put his panties back on and got dressed once more to see what else he could do. The time continued to progress for him in the room. A short time after looking all over his body with the mirror, he began to think that since he no longer really looked like a man, nor dressed as one, he may as well start referring to himself in the feminine form. He had been thinking about this decision more and more with each passing day. Since she didn't know if there would ever be a day when she would get out of her room, there was no one there to care about if they called her a man or a woman. She still had a penis of sorts, but she didn't even need to try to hide it when she put her panties on. It just kind of naturally sucked back into her body and didn't show much at all. She had become quite skilled with her makeup over the time, and couldn't seem to remember walking in anything other than heels. She felt that she had done quite well with herself, despite no real interaction with anyone. Since she was thinking of herself in the feminine form now, she felt that her name should change too. David just didn't seem to cut it as a woman's name. She was thinking for a while about what name to go with and different meanings behind them. Since this was a new beginning of life for her, she ultimately went with Dawn, as it seemed to her to be the dawn of a new day. She remembered a girlfriend that she had whose name was Nia. She remembered that her girlfriend used to say that it meant beauty or brightness. Because of this, she finally decided that her new name would be Nia Dawn. It seemed to flow well for her. So, Dawn continued to live out her life in the room as she had come to know better than anywhere else in her life. She still appreciated being alive, but found herself wondering why she was chosen to be there in the first place. The whole time she was there, the only companions she had were the constant music of the speaker, the images on the monitor, her food, and finally her new clothes and makeup. Even though she didn't feel as lonely as she thought she would, she still kind of missed human interactions with others. There seemed to be something that had been keeping her calm despite being kidnapped in a way, but she just seemed to go with it and adapt. She found herself thinking back to her life outside of the room. Her parents had passed away some time ago, and she didn't have any siblings, but she did have some friends she kept up with. Since she was in the room now with no way out, she started to finally feel a bit of sadness with her predicament. She still had a will to live, but it was finally starting to feel a bit cramped in her room. As she was getting ready for bed one night, she was thinking about all that she had gone through since first waking up in the room. As she slipped a more sheer nightgown on before laying down on the bed, she felt a sense of pride about not giving in to what had happened to her. She could sleep soundly knowing that she had survived this ordeal and could hold her head up high because of it. The new morning came for her with one of the biggest shocks of her life. For the first time in however long with her, she found herself in a different room. At first, she was terrified at what was going on. There was a huge sensory overload with her as she didn't hear the speaker at all. She heard birds chirping outside. She looked over and saw a window. She had a window in this new room. There was also a door with a knob on it. She could leave this room if she wanted. The bed she was in also felt softer. She saw a television sitting in a cabinet on one wall and looked over to see a huge mirror that sat over a sink. She eventually recognized this room as a hotel room. She got up and found that she was wearing a different nightgown than what she remembered going to bed in. As she finally came to terms that she was not in her room, she finally managed to get out of bed. She walked over to the window and peeked outside. She didn't recognize where she was, but she saw trees, several cars parked, and other parts of the building she was in. She grew concerned about going outside because she didn't know what to expect, so she closed the curtain on the window and went back to the bed to sit. As she was sitting on the bed, she looked around this new room to see what was there. Other than being a regular hotel room, she did see that this one had a small refrigerator in it. She also noticed a suitcase sitting on a table near the television. She walked over to the suitcase and opened it up to see that some of her dresses from the room were in there, along with most of her bras and panties that she had. She didn't have everything from her former room with her, but she did at least have something to cover up with when she could go outside. It didn't occur to her at that time, but she hadn't said a word since she woke up in her original room that she had spent so long in. She wasn't sure why, but it just didn't occur to her to talk to herself while she was there. She thought about what she could say, but the only thing that came to her mind to say at the time was her name, Nia Dawn. She knew that people don't hear their actual voice when speaking, but she knew that before she got into the room, she had a good idea at the depth of hers. When she said her name, this resulted in confusion from her as she knew that it was nowhere as deep as she remembered. She spoke some more out loud and was certain that something had been done to her voice to make it different. It just felt like she was speaking softer, but in a higher pitch maybe. After going through the rest of her suitcase, she looked at the refrigerator in the room and walked over to it to see about some food. Fortunately, her captors saw to her needs even then, as the refrigerator had plenty of food in it. At least it looked like a couple of days or more. She heated up a small portion of food in the microwave there and sat down to eat. After she was done eating, she decided that it was time to venture out into the world for the first time in her new life. She went to use the restroom and noticed that her captors had left her with some shampoo and other items to clean up with. She still smelled as good as she normally did after waking up in the room, so she decided to just use the restroom and get dressed. She picked out a different pair of panties and a bra to put on. After putting her dress on, she slipped on a pair of pumps, and for the first time in as many days, she picked up the room's key card, opened the door to her room and stepped outside. When she got outside, the rush of new noises was quite a shock for her. She looked around and saw familiar objects around her, like cars, trees, people off in the distance, and other items from a normal life, but they all felt alien to her at the time. She closed the door and noticed a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging from it. She noted her room number on the door and set about walking to the front desk to see if she could get some questions answered. When she finally got to the front desk, she, for the first time in a while, was about to interact with another person. She saw a young-looking woman at the front desk whose name was Sarah. She asked Sarah some basic questions about the location they were at, and other nondescript questions. She didn't want to cause any concern or panic at her being a missing person. She was certain that with the amount of time she likely has been gone, she would be a missing person by now. She was shocked when she realized that she was almost 500 miles away from where she remembered getting into that taxi. She remembered that she was on vacation from work, and the hotel she was staying at was far from home, so she could really get away. If only she knew how far she would have come after getting in that taxi that fateful day. She returned to her hotel room to try and come up with a game plan on how to get back home. One thing she noticed while at the front desk was the calendar sitting on the counter. If it was right, she had been gone for almost 3 years. When she saw that shocker, it took a bit of time to fight back the tears that were threatening to come up. Once she got into her hotel room again, though, the floodgates opened and she cried for the first time in, 3 years it seemed. To be gone that long from the life she knew seemed almost impossible, yet here she was living an impossible. When she was able to regain her composure once again, she needed to come up with a game plan to try and get back home to see if there was anything possible to do there. She searched through the suitcase that was given to her and discovered $1,000 in cash in one of the front pouches. Again, she found herself thanking her captors for taking care of her like that. She was conflicted though, because had they not taken her, she wouldn't be where she was right now. But on the same note, they had kept her alive, and for nearly 3 years when they could have just done something far worse. She wasn't sure how she was going to be able to get home because she didn't have any valid form of identification that said who she is now. No ID also ruled out renting a car. It seemed as they not only wanted a driver's license, but other documents that she didn't have. This left her with only one option that she could think of now: the bus. She didn't relish the idea of traveling by bus for as far as she needed to go, but if she was going to get home as discreetly as possible, this was the way in front of her. She went back to the front desk and got some information about getting a bus ticket. The first available one would be the next day, so Sarah booked a ticket for her on it. She returned to her hotel room and started to pack up what she could for the long journey. With nothing more to do in preparation for the trip, she sat back down on the bed to think about anything to get her mind occupied. As she was lying on the bed, she found herself missing the constant music coming through the speaker and the images on the monitor. It was her normal routine for so long that she wasn't sure how to fill that gap. She turned on the television in the room and put it on a random channel for some noise. That seemed to help some, but now she started to see herself getting bored for the first time. Normally she would have went online with her phone, or even computer, but not having any of them with her, nor the funding to get them, she remembered that there was a public-use computer in the lobby of the hotel. She went over to it to see if anything she had before being taken was still around. She checked her personal email address and found pages of unread emails. The earliest one started off asking where she was at, if she was going to be returning to work, her termination letter from lack of returning, rental agreement termination at her apartment, and far too many more to actually go through at this time. She then typed her old name into a search engine and found a missing persons report on her. It didn't say anything along the lines of any information leading up to the disappearance, but she did note the police department where she was living had been working on it. She looked around the hotel lobby and saw some magazines and other reading material. She wanted to take something to read for the journey, as she figured if she read something to pass the time, it might go quicker. She went back to her hotel room and heated up some more of the food that was left for her in the refrigerator. As she was eating the reheated food, she found herself longing for the fresh food that came out of the slot in the wall over her table. She finished eating and saw that it was getting dark outside, so she got changed into her nightgown and settled down to sleep. When she got up the next morning, she took a shower with the products that her captors had left her, and got dressed in her customary matching bra and panties. She put on a light foundation of makeup, and finished getting dressed for the day. She went with a more conservative dress that went below her knees, and a low-heeled pump for better comfort. She was hoping for some peace and quiet on the bus because she didn't really want to interact with anyone. She then packed up her suitcase to get ready for the bus. Fortunately, it wasn't too far of a walk to get to the bus station from the hotel. She looked in the refrigerator and finished off what was left of the food in it and waited for the time when the bus should be ready. When it got close enough to the departure time, she braced herself and left the hotel room to start on her journey. The walk to the bus station was uneventful, and fortunately they didn't require anything from her other than the ticket that Sarah had printed up for her at the hotel. She boarded the bus and found a seat as far in the back as she could. The bus did fill up a good bit, but not too much to the point where she was crowded in place. She was thankful that the bus driver allowed her to carry her suitcase on board. He originally wasn't going to let her, but she managed to convince him to let her once he felt sorry for her. She didn't realize it until the bus was underway that she had used her supposed helplessness to get her way on the bus. Not that it was a good thing that the bus driver assumed she was helpless, but she was more than welcome to take advantage of that situation anyway. The suitcase she had basically contained everything she now owned in it, and it would be a terrible shame to lose it. She picked up one of the magazines that she got from the hotel room. It didn't occur to her until she looked at the magazine, but it was one designed more for women's interests. Strangely enough, though, she found herself more than interested in the articles that it had. She even found herself reading some of them a couple of times. The bus made a couple of stops the first day of the journey. They could be used for bathroom breaks, food, or just to stretch your legs. The first stop she found herself needing to use the bathroom. This almost led to a mistake on her part. She had her own toilet for so long now that she didn't have any time to prepare for the difference on men's or women's restrooms. She almost subconsciously walked into the men's room as she was accustomed to, but fortunately she caught herself at the right time and walked into the women's restroom. This was truly a new experience for her, as she had never once been inside of one. It looked the same as a men's restroom, but without the urinals on the wall. She picked a stall and sat down to pee. After cleaning herself up, she walked in front of one of the mirrors there to see if she was still presentable enough. There were several other women in there with her, but they didn't pay her any attention. She obviously looked the part externally, so why should they question her being there? When she was finished, she walked back to the bus and returned to her seat. The bus ride was going to run all through the night. She didn't think enough about this, as when she started to feel tired, she realized that they weren't going to stop for the night. She leaned back in her seat as best as she could, and was able to ball up one of her dresses as a makeshift pillow. It was difficult to sleep in the back of the moving bus, to say the least. It was kind of bumpy, and she didn't fully trust people currently. She did manage to take some minor naps throughout the night, but was for certain that she didn't get a full night of rest, sadly. She found herself thinking about how she was going to handle things when she got home. She thought she would just rent a hotel room for the night, but she didn't think she would be able to on account of not having any ID with her. Her best guess for things once she got there was to head straight to the police department. This was going to be a huge shock to her system, but she needed to get things cleared up so she could try and move forward with life. The way the bus was traveling, she found that it would be later in the afternoon when they would arrive. As the bus was nearing where she lived, she couldn't help but get a little emotional about it. She was seeing familiar sights, although in almost 3 years of time, a fair bit had changed. But there was still some similarity to them. Once the bus got to the station, she departed and needed to figure out a way to get to the police station. It would be a bit of a walk to make, so she reluctantly called for a taxi to pick her up. She was beyond nervous during the whole taxi ride, as her last one was too eventful, but she did make it to the police station in one piece. After paying the driver, she stood in front of the police station with a fear that she never knew before. She stood there for a bit before going inside. The town wasn't an overly large one, but it still had a sizable police force about it, or at least, having never really talked to them much, she thought they seemed large enough. She walked up to the front desk and asked the officer working there about how they handled missing persons cases. The officer gave her some brief information about what they normally tried to do, but then asked her why she was curious. She took a deep breath and stated that she was a missing person from this town. The officer behind the desk asked her to take a walk with him to one of the meeting rooms they had to discuss matters with. When they got there, the officer began asking her question after question regarding who she was, where she had been, how she got there, and a multitude of other questions. The officer tried to keep calm enough with the questioning, especially when Dawn started to break down. The confusion for the officer also came from the fact that the person that was missing was a man, yet in front of him was a woman. They brought out a fingerprinting kit and took her prints to try and match them up. As it turned out, her prints did match up very closely to her male self. The officers told her that fingerprinting wasn't an exact science, but they felt certain that she was who she said she was. She was in the room for hours after that. They were able to search for his old name and found out that it was a valid report. She was able to verify a lot of information regarding her old self so that she could validate her claim. She wasn't sure who had taken her, where she had been all this time, or why they would have turned her into nearly a full woman. Fortunately, they didn't require her to show what was inside of her panties. They did say that some further tests would be needed to prove that she was who she said she was, though. When it got late in the evening, they asked her if she had anywhere to stay. When she said she didn't, they offered to let her stay in one of the cells on site for the night. With no real options, she decided that a cell would be better than the streets, so she agreed. They set her up with some food and said that if she needed anything, an officer would be on site to assist. Being in the cell reminded her somewhat of the room that she spent all that time recently in, albeit without the music from the speaker. She was able to keep her suitcase with her, but she didn't feel too comfortable changing clothes in the cell, so she just slept in her dress that she came in with. The next day found her with even more questions than the day before. They brought in a medical examiner to take some blood and check her out physically. She found a bit of embarrassment when the examiner asked her to strip naked. As she was sliding her panties down, she became all too aware of the fact that she still had a penis hiding within them. She didn't feel as self-conscious when she removed her bra because she did have natural breasts for it to support. After she was checked out from head to toe, the examiner finally allowed her to put her clothes back on. The examiner did note that she seemed to have a small scar near her throat. This was most likely from a surgery that had raised the pitch in her voice. The officers that she worked with treated her with respect despite what she looked like. They arranged to get her a temporary ID card, although they had to legally put male as her gender for the time being, but at least she had some identification to use now. They used the precinct as her mailing address until something more permanent could be obtained. At the end of this stay, she was able to get a cheap room at a local hotel for now as she didn't want to spend another night in the cell at the precinct. She was able to keep the public mostly quiet about what was going on. Thankfully, the officers, and everyone else that she had dealt with, were also able to maintain silence with the situation as no one really knew how to properly handle it. She met with a psychiatrist, whose name was Nancy, in between other questions from officers. Nancy was able to recognize deep psychological programming set in Dawn's mind. She was able to try some hypnosis to uncover anything that led her to the point she was at now, but it was to no avail. Her whereabouts over the last 3 years was anybody's guess other than her captors. From what the officers were able to piece together, there didn't seem to be any factors that led to the original kidnapping. They did coordinate with the police department where she was originally taken from to see if they could help. In the end, it was discovered that the taxi that she took wasn't any that was registered with the companies in their town. The main problem was the duration of time from the capture until now. Any surveillance videos from that long ago were bound to be gone, as well as anyone that may have been working there at the time. Everyone seemed to be at a total loss. She also was able to get the results back from the blood work. They found that she was producing higher levels of estrogen in her system that was almost equal to a normal woman. The conclusion that was made leaned toward her being drugged by it during her time in the room. The days turned into weeks from when she arrived. The original money that was in her suitcase from her captors was almost exhausted, so she needed to get employment as the hotel room, while inexpensive, was eating away at what little money she had left. The police station was able to help her get into a small apartment in town until she got on her feet better. She thought about trying to get a job with the company that she originally worked at before, but felt that it would be too awkward if word got out as to who she really was. She figured it would be better to get a small-time type of job somewhere to at least get money coming in. Her main problem came up again with her ID. It still said male on it. She began to wonder if she should try to remain as a woman, or attempt to become her old male self again. She thought about it for a while and it kept her up most nights. Nancy didn't offer a whole lot of help in the matter either, as she didn't want to sway her one way or the other. Finally, one evening while sitting in her apartment, she came to the decision that while being David had its advantages, she was so programmed into being Dawn that it would be better to remain that way instead. With this new knowledge in mind, she was able to work better with Nancy to get some paperwork together to get the M changed to an F on her ID. When that paperwork was ready, she went and got a new driver's license with her picture on it. It looked kind of odd to see her female face on a license with it marked F in the gender area, but she at least had some semblance of peace with the decision since she was released. With her new license in hand, she set about trying to find a job. She was working in an office setting before, so she thought about trying out for that again. She had to go get some new clothes to interview with, so she went to a women's clothing store to find something. This brought in some new experiences for her, as she realized that all the clothes she had been wearing had no tags on it. As a result, she had no idea what any of her sizing would be for any of her clothing. When she got to the store, she made up a story to the sales lady that she had recently lost a lot of weight and was unsure of what her new sizes might be. She got measured all around for her clothing. She finally was able to close in on her breast size. She was a 38C. With her originally larger frame from her male self, the C-cup breasts looked okay enough on her. By this time though, she was more than used to having them at that size. She got fitted for a blouse and skirt set that looked perfect for interviewing with. She also picked up a few more bras and panties that coordinated well together with her ensemble. With her purchases in hand, she returned to her apartment to call it a successful day. She hand-wrote a resume of sorts out which had a lot of blanks in it. She did mention the skills that she had from when she was working in an office before, but hopefully what she was able to put together would work. When she finally had it written up, she was able to go to the library and get a typed version for use. She tried a couple offices in the area to look for employment. Many turned her down from lack of information on the resume, but she did finally manage to find one that would take a chance with her. They were impressed with her calm demeanor and what computer skills she had, so they offered her a job as a secretary. It was not the type of job that she ever thought that she would be doing, not because of a male or female aspect, but she at least had her foot in the door somewhere. The knowledge that she finally had a way to earn an income filled in another step in the right place in her mind, which brought more peace to her. She would have to take a bus to work until she could manage enough to get a car to use, but things were starting to take place in the right direction. She was still working with the police when they had any questions for her, but for now they were at a loss with her case. She did manage to get a cell phone which made communication with her better. Slowly but surely her new life was coming together. There was just so much to do to get one started, it seemed. She was able to fall into a routine at work once she got started. They liked her voice when she answered the phones for them, and her willingness to take care of any task that was presented to her. Over time she was able to move up the corporate ladder some to the point where they hired a new girl to work for her. Things began to fall into a common schedule for her now, and she found it harder and harder to really remember her former life. She hadn't received a call from the police in a long time, but she really didn't expect to anymore as there seemed to be no trace of her captors. She was finally able to get used to not having to have constant music playing in the background somewhere. She was also getting used to living fully as a woman in all respects of life. She did remain secluded though with her personal life, as she still had an underlying fear of trusting anyone too closely. As her finances became steady, she was finally able to buy a car to use. It wasn't the best around, but it reminded her of the one that she had before. On top of everything, it meant an end to public transportation for her finally. With her life coming to a steady style once again with the addition of the car, she had more time from work to think about her other situation, her penis and testicles. She was released from her captors almost a year and a half ago, but she still had kept them. Her lifestyle said she was a female, her mindset said she was a female, her body said she was too, except for what she hid in her panties. After all the previous years in her life, she had never really thought a day would come when she felt that she didn't want them anymore, but with the way things were going now, she couldn't seem to find a reason to keep them. She wasn't interacting with Nancy much anymore, as they both seemed to think that there was some closure with her situation. She thought of her more as a good friend that knew much more than anyone else about her. She did reach out to her to see about information regarding surgery to get her issue resolved. There came a hefty price tag with it, but by this time she was making some decent money where she worked. It now came down to a coin toss on keeping her jewels, as it were, or cashing them in. In the end, she decided that removing them would be for the better, as she wouldn't have to be as self-conscious of them anymore, so she set up for the surgical procedure. To everyone that she worked with, they all assumed she was a natural-born woman. She didn't want anyone to know what she was, so she had some difficulty in finding someone to take her to the hospital. Nancy was able to come through for her, as she recognized the frustration she was going through after their talks. Dawn took some time off work, saying that she needed to take care of some things. Since she was doing so well there, they gave her all the time she needed. The day of the surgery came, and she was nervous once again, thinking about the permanent aspect of what she was about to do. As she was right now, she did have an option to return to her male self once again if she wanted. After the surgery, though, that's all there would be to it. Sure, she could try and present as a male again, but this time the roles would be reversed. Instead of being a woman with a penis and testicles, she would be a man with a vagina. It felt better though, just going through with the surgery and becoming a woman, not just inside, but on the outside as well. She got checked into the hospital, changed into a hospital gown, and was finally wheeled into the surgical room. The next thing she knew, she was lying in a hospital bed with Nancy sitting next to her. She said that the surgery appeared to be a success, but she would leave that for the doctor to say. After making sure that she was okay, Nancy left, saying that she would be back to take her home when the doctor said she could leave. When she left the room, Dawn was left alone once more, but by this time, she was still sort of used to being left alone in a room, especially a hospital room. The big differences in this room though was that she had a window, the lighting was not as bright, and the best difference was that this room had a door with a handle on it. A doctor came in some time later to let her know that the surgery was a success, and he was able to give her a relatively normal-looking vagina. He said that a nurse would be in later to give her details on dilating her vagina and how to properly care for it. After he left, a nurse did come in and talked with her for a while about how to care for her vagina, the dilation process, and anything else that came to mind for her to use. The way that the nurse talked with her, it made her feel better at ease with her decision to go through with the surgery. Once she had healed up enough to have the bandages removed, she was finally able to see the results. She had seen her past girlfriends' vaginas, so it wasn't a total shock to see one now. The shock came from seeing that it was her vagina now. She went into the bathroom to look at it in a better light. She felt around at the different folds and feelings that she had. She wasn't sure about the aspect of inserting something into there at this moment, but she knew that it would be something to take care of sooner than later, or she would likely face complications with it. While she was examining her new equipment, she felt a familiar, but odd, sensation of needing to pee. This was going to be a new first for her, as although she couldn't even remember what it was like to stand and pee anymore, this time she would be peeing from a different location. Up until the bandages had been removed, they had a catheter inserted for her to use. It felt odd at first, but this time though, when she wiped, she felt complete for some reason. She was soon healed up nicely enough to be able to leave the hospital too. On the day when she was going to check out of the hospital, she began to get dressed. Her bra fit her as fine as always, but when she pulled her panties up, they fit a whole lot better than she thought they could ever feel. She used to have the slightest bulge in front of them, but this time there was nothing but a smooth panel. She didn't have to worry about any more unsightly bulges now. A slight problem came from the fact that even though the bulge wasn't too obvious, her panties did fit slightly loose in the area where her penis and testicles used to be. She was going to have to go out and buy all new panties now, but that seemed to be a perk rather than an obligation. Once she was fully dressed, Nancy came by to pick her up so that she could go home now. After she was dropped off and made sure all was well, Dawn was alone in her apartment fully as a woman, inside and out. She was not sure why she was chosen to be the one kidnapped and transformed like she was, but she wasn't really the kind to let things overcome her, but to adapt to the situation as she could. This new lifestyle was going to be a bit tricky to completely get used to, but as she had become used to being a man, so now she can get used to being a woman. Her new life was about to being